The knock on my door came at 11:47 p.m., in the middle of the worst winter storm our town had seen in years. The wind screamed outside like something alive, throwing ice against the windows hard enough to make the glass tremble. I opened the door expecting an emergency, and in a way, it was. My neighbor, Emily, stood there with snow on her coat, tears in her eyes, and exhaustion written across her face. She looked as if she had been carrying the weight of the world for far too long. Then she asked a question so simple, yet so heartbreaking, that it changed both our lives forever. She quietly asked if there was room in my bed, and after a long silence, I answered that there was, but only if she promised not to leave tomorrow. Before we continue this emotional story, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who believes in kindness and second chances, and subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming stories. Also, tell us in the comments, do you believe one small act of kindness can change a person's entire life? Your support helps us bring more inspiring stories to people around the world. 3 years earlier, I had lost almost everything that mattered to me. My marriage had ended, my father had passed away after a long illness, and the home that once felt warm and full of life had become painfully silent. I learned that loneliness is not simply being alone. Loneliness is waking up every morning with no one to say good morning to. It is eating dinner in front of a television because the quiet feels too heavy. It is carrying memories like stones in your pockets, growing heavier with each passing year. The small neighborhood where I lived was peaceful, made up of ordinary people living ordinary lives. There was the retired teacher who watered her flowers every morning, the young family with children who rode bicycles down the street, and then there was Emily. She had moved into the small house next door about a year earlier. She always smiled politely, always waved, but there was sadness in her eyes that no smile could hide. I learned little pieces of her story over time. She worked long hours at a local bookstore. She had moved to town after ending a difficult relationship. Her parents had passed away years before, leaving her with very little family. Like me, she understood silence. Like me, she knew what it meant to rebuild a life from broken pieces. At first, we were only neighbors. Sometimes I would help carry groceries. Sometimes she would bring over homemade cookies or leave a cup of coffee on my porch during cold mornings. There was no grand romance, no dramatic moment. Just two lonely people slowly learning that kindness can become a bridge between strangers. Then came the winter storm. The weather reports warned everyone to stay inside, but storms do not care about warnings. That night, the power went out across part of the neighborhood. The temperatures dropped dangerously low. I sat in my living room wrapped in blankets, listening to the wind, when I heard the knock. Emily stood there shivering. Her heating system had failed completely, and the repair company could not come until morning. But it was more than the cold that had brought her to my door. Something inside her had broken that evening. She had received news that the bookstore where she worked was closing permanently. The place that had been her second home was gone, and suddenly her future felt uncertain. I invited her inside, made tea, and we sat quietly by the fireplace. Sometimes people do not need advice. They do not need solutions. Sometimes they simply need someone willing to sit beside them in the dark. Hours passed as the storm raged outside. We talked about our lives, our regrets, and the dreams we had quietly buried over the years. For the first time, Emily spoke honestly about her fears. She was tired of pretending to be strong. Tired of carrying sadness alone. Tired of feeling like she was always one bad day away from falling apart. I understood because I had lived the same truth. As the night grew colder, she asked softly if there was room in my bed. It was not a question about romance. It was a question about trust. About safety. About whether there was still a place in this world where she did not have to face everything alone. And I answered honestly. I told her there was room, but only if she did not leave tomorrow. What I really meant was something deeper. I was asking her not to disappear behind walls again. not to return to a life of loneliness. I was asking her to stay, not just for one night, but in the small everyday moments that make life meaningful. The next morning, the storm passed. Sunlight reflected off fresh snow, turning the world bright and beautiful. Emily stood in my kitchen holding a cup of coffee, smiling in a way I had never seen before. It was not a polite smile. It was the smile of someone who had finally put down a heavy burden. Days turned into weeks. The bookstore closed, and Emily struggled to find direction. There were moments when fear returned. Moments when she doubted herself. I watched her send applications, face rejection, and wonder if she was too late to start over. But something had changed. She was no longer facing those struggles alone. We began helping each other in quiet ways. She encouraged me to reconnect with old friends. I helped her believe in her talents. Together, we turned difficult days into manageable ones. We cooked dinners, walked through the park, and discovered that healing often happens slowly, almost invisibly, through ordinary moments. Then one afternoon, Emily shared a dream she had carried since childhood. She wanted to open a small community reading center where children could discover books, where lonely people could gather, where stories could bring people together. It sounded impossible. We had little money, little experience, and countless reasons to give up. But hope is a strange thing. It grows strongest in people who have known despair. We worked for months. Friends from the neighborhood helped. The retired teacher donated books. Families volunteered. Old shelves were repaired, walls painted, and little by little, the dream became real. The reading center opened on a warm spring morning. Children filled the rooms with laughter. Elderly people sat reading together. People who had once felt alone found a place where they belonged. Standing in that room, watching Emily smile, I realized something important. Love is not always grand or dramatic. Sometimes love is opening a door during a storm. Sometimes it is making tea. Sometimes it is telling someone they do not have to leave tomorrow. Years later, people often asked us how our story began. They expected a romantic answer. But the truth was simpler. It began with two lonely people who chose kindness instead of fear. It began with a storm. It began with a question. And it began with an answer that changed everything. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Your support helps these stories reach people who may need a little hope today. Special request, before the ending, write in the comments, no one should face life's storms alone. Today, the reading center still stands in our town. Children still laugh there. Neighbors still gather there. And every winter, when storms come, Emily and I sit by the fireplace together, grateful for the night that brought two broken people to the same door. Because life is not about avoiding storms. It is about finding the people who stay when the storm arrives. And sometimes, the greatest miracle is not that someone asks if there is room in your life. It is having the courage to answer, yes, and asking them to stay.